So, it was quite an imposing figure that I was looking at. And that was my first impression of hockey in Chicago.
I spent a long time playing this game, more than 20 seasons. I scored goals, won awards, had moments people still talk about. Fans remember the numbers, the banners, the championships. But at my age, that is not what I think about most. What stays with me are the players who made me work for every single one of those moments. When I was young and competing, there was no time to appreciate that. Everything moved too fast. One game led to the next. One shift led to another. Winning was the only thing that mattered. I let my stick do the talking back then. Now, with some distance, I can finally look back and understand who really pushed me. Not the greatest players of all time, but the ones who were toughest for me personally. Each one challenged something different. Some took away my rhythm. Some exposed my weaknesses. One forced me to rethink how I played center. These are the 5 pressures that stayed with me. At number 5, I am going with Kenny Wharram. He is not the name people expect, and I understand that. Kenny was not loud. He did not dominate headlines. He did not try to take over games by force. But when I think back, honestly, he applied a kind of pressure that followed me for years. The kind that never announces itself, yet quietly controls everything. Playing center, I always believed the pace belonged to me. I decided when the game sped up and when it slowed down. That belief worked most nights. With Kenny on the ice, it was tested constantly. Not because he rushed me, but because he never rushed himself. His timing forced me into precision. There was no room for impulse, no space for improvisation. If I pushed the puck too early, the play broke. If I waited too long, the window closed. Kenny did not demand the puck. He drifted into space and waited for the exact moment defenders relaxed. That patience put pressure on me before the puck ever reached my stick. I had to be cleaner. I had to be calmer. I had to trust structure instead of instinct. What made it harder was how ordinary it looked from the outside. No collisions, no arguments, no emotional moments, just the constant demand to play the game the right way, shift after shift, night after night. That kind of pressure stays with you because it never gives you an excuse. There is no one to blame, no moment to hide behind. Either the play works or it fails quietly. Kenny taught me something important early in my career. Hockey is not always about speed. Sometimes speed is the enemy. Timing matters more. Patience matters more. Discipline matters more. Playing with him forced me to slow my thinking down, even when the game felt fast. That adjustment did not come naturally to me. It had to be learned. There were nights when I felt uncomfortable, even when things were going well. That was Kenny's influence. I could not cheat the game. I could not force something just because I wanted to. Every decision carried weight. Every mistake felt immediate. That is pressure in its purest form. What I admired most was that Kenny never tried to impress me. He simply played his game, and by doing that, he forced me to refine mine. That kind of influence is rare. It does not show up in highlights or box scores, but it shapes careers. Years later, when I think about admiration, this is where it starts. Not with someone who makes the game easier, but with someone who refuses to let you play it your way. Kenny took something simple and made it demanding. He turned rhythm into responsibility. That is why he is number 5. Not because he made me look better, but because he made me more disciplined. He forced me to respect timing, structure, and patience in a way I never forgot. And once you learn that kind of lesson, it stays with you long after the noise fades. At number 4, I am going with Glenn Hall. This pressure was different. It did not come from a skater taking space away. It came from the feeling that my best ideas were already known. Playing center, I always trusted my reads. I trusted that if I did the right thing, the game would reward me. Against Glenn, that confidence was tested in a quieter way. Nothing about him felt rushed. Nothing felt dramatic. He stood there calm, balanced, almost detached from the chaos in front of him. Shots that felt clean did not go in. Plays that usually worked ended with the puck coming right back out. That does something to you. It forces you to look inward. I started asking myself harder questions. Was the lane really there? Was the release quick enough? Was the decision right, or just familiar? Glenn did not beat me with reaction. He beat me with anticipation. He made me feel like the game was one step ahead of me. That kind of pressure sits in your head. I could skate harder. I could work longer shifts. But none of that mattered if my decisions stayed the same. Glenn forced me to slow the game down mentally. He demanded better options, not more effort. That is a difficult lesson for a competitor to accept. There were nights when I felt like I did everything right and still came up empty. That is when doubt creeps in. Not panic, not fear, doubt, the most dangerous kind. Glenn created that without saying a word, without moving much at all, just by being where he needed to be. What made it even harder was knowing that mistakes would not be forgiven. A rush shot became a clear save. A forced pass became nothing. There was no chaos to hide behind, no rebound to chase. Everything felt final. That pressure forced discipline. It forced honesty. I learned that sometimes pressure does not come from being challenged physically. It comes from being denied mentally. Glenn denied me comfort. He denied me patterns. He denied me the idea that doing what had always worked would be enough. Over time, that changed how I played. I became more patient. I waited for better moments. I accepted that not every chance needed to be taken. That adjustment stayed with me long after those games ended. It shaped how I saw the position in front of me. It shaped how I respected it. Admiration in this case was not emotional. It was inevitable. Glenn showed me that control does not always belong to the player with the puck. Sometimes it belongs to the one who refuses to move until you make the wrong choice. That is why he is number 4. Not because he stopped shots, but because he stopped habits. He forced me to rethink decisions I thought were automatic. And that kind of pressure stays with you longer than any save you remember. At number 3, I am going with Ted Lindsay. This was a different kind of pressure again. It did not come from rhythm like Kenny Wharram. It did not come from anticipation like Glenn Hall. It came from expectation, from standard, from the feeling that nothing less than full commitment was acceptable ever. Playing against Ted, there was no such thing as a quiet shift. Even when nothing happened on the score sheet, the game felt heavy. Every battle mattered. Every inch of ice had to be earned. I could not float. I could not manage energy the way I wanted to. Ted did not allow that kind of comfort. What made him difficult was not size or speed. It was persistence. He was always there, always leaning, always forcing engagement. If I tried to save something for later in the game, he made sure there was nothing left to save. That kind of pressure drains you slowly. It does not explode. It accumulates. I learned quickly that effort alone was not enough. Ted demanded consistency. One strong shift did not mean anything if the next one dropped. One smart play did not erase a careless moment. He forced me to respect every second on the ice. That kind of discipline is exhausting, but it is also clarifying. There were games where I felt worn down without realizing why. Looking back, it was Ted's influence. He never gave me a mental break. Even when the puck was on the other side of the rink, I felt accountable. That awareness changes how you play. It sharpens you, whether you want it to or not. Ted also taught me something uncomfortable. Pressure does not always come from skill. Sometimes it comes from refusal. Refusal to let you relax. Refusal to let standards drop. Refusal to accept shortcuts. Playing against him felt like being measured constantly. Over time, that shaped me. I became more demanding of myself. I stopped excusing small mistakes. I understood that winning was not built on big moments alone, but on the discipline to repeat good habits under fatigue. That lesson stayed with me longer than any specific game. Admiration here was not admiration in the usual sense. It was recognition that this was what real competition looked like. Honest, relentless, unforgiving. Ted did not try to intimidate me. He simply exposed any weakness I tried to hide. That is why he is number 3. Not because he overwhelmed me in one moment, but because he challenged me every moment. He forced me to raise my standard or accept being left behind. And once that standard is set, it never really goes away. At number 2, I am going with Béliveau. This pressure was not loud. It was not aggressive. It did not come at you in waves. It was there the moment you stepped onto the ice and realized you were standing across from something bigger than a matchup. Something closer to a standard. Facing Gene, I felt smaller without him doing anything to make me feel that way. He did not rush plays. He did not force contact. He simply occupied space with calm authority. That changes how you think. That changes how you stand at a face-off. That changes how you prepare for a shift. I had played against strong players before. I had played against skilled players. Gene was different. He carried responsibility in the way he moved. Every decision felt deliberate. Every action had weight. Playing center against him, I could not rely on energy or instinct. I had to be precise. I had to be respectful of every inch of ice. What made it difficult was that there was nothing to push against emotionally. No edge, no hostility, no tension you could feed on, just presence. And presence is hard to beat. It forces you to look at yourself instead of your opponent. I remember moments when I caught myself adjusting without realizing it. Standing a little lower, taking an extra second before making a play, choosing safety over ambition. That was his influence. He did not demand it. I did it to myself. Gene showed me that the center position was not just about controlling the puck. It was about carrying the game correctly, about understanding when to lead and when to stabilize. Playing against him felt like being measured against what the position was meant to be, not what I wanted it to be. There were nights when I left the ice feeling challenged without feeling beaten. That is rare. Usually pressure feels confrontational. With Gene, it felt instructional. He did not expose mistakes loudly. He let them exist quietly, which made them impossible to ignore. Over time, that changed how I saw my role. I stopped thinking only about influence. I started thinking about responsibility, about how my decisions affected everyone around me. That shift did not come easily. It came from being forced into it by someone who embodied it naturally. Admiration here was not admiration for talent. It was admiration for composure, for restraint, for understanding the weight of the position. Gene never took anything from me directly. He made me give it up myself. That is why he is number 2. Not because he dominated me in moments, but because he redefined the center position every time we shared the ice. He made me understand that true authority does not need to announce itself. And once you experience that kind of pressure, it becomes impossible to forget. At number 1, I am going with Bobby Hull. This was the deepest pressure I ever felt because it was not aimed only at me. It was aimed at the game itself. Playing with Bobby and against the reality he created forced me to understand something early. Hockey was changing, and if I did not change with it, I would be left behind. Bobby did not just skate fast. He altered how space worked. Defenders backed up sooner. Goaltenders set their feet differently. Passing lanes opened and closed in new ways. Every shift, the ice felt stretched and compressed at the same time. That kind of presence changes how a center has to think. For me, that pressure lived in responsibility. If I hesitated, Bobby was already gone. If I rushed, the play fell apart. I had to read the game one step ahead, not because I wanted to, but because the pace demanded it. Playing with him removed excuses. The margin for error disappeared. What made it heavier was that his impact was unavoidable. I could not choose when to deal with it. Every time he was on the ice, the game tilted. That forced me to sharpen everything. Timing, awareness, discipline. My job was not to keep up with him. My job was to make sense of the chaos he created. There were nights when it felt overwhelming, not because I doubted myself, but because the standard kept moving. What worked yesterday no longer worked today. Bobby made stagnation impossible. That kind of pressure is uncomfortable, but it is also clarifying. It tells you exactly where you stand. I learned that greatness does not always confront you directly. Sometimes it surrounds you and demands adaptation. Bobby did not ask me to change. He made change the only option. That is the most powerful form of pressure I know. Over time, that reshaped how I played the position. I stopped thinking only about execution. I started thinking about anticipation, about preparing the game for what was coming, not what was already there. That lesson stayed with me long after our shifts together ended. Admiration here was absolute. Not because of numbers or power, but because of influence. Bobby influenced every decision I made as a center. He influenced how the opposition played. He influenced how the league evolved. Being close to that forced me to grow or disappear. That is why he is number 1. Not because he challenged me in a single way, but because he challenged everything. He applied pressure that reshaped the game and reshaped me along with it. And once you live inside that kind of pressure, you never really leave it behind. When I put these 5 names together, I do not see a ranking of greatness. I see a timeline of pressure. Each one arrived at a different moment in my career, and each one forced a different adjustment. None of them made the game easier. All of them made it clearer. Kenny Wharram taught me patience when instinct told me to rush. Glenn Hall taught me doubt, the kind that forces honesty in decision-making. Ted Lindsay demanded consistency when fatigue made shortcuts tempting. Jean Béliveau showed me what responsibility at center really meant. And Bobby Hull made it impossible to stay the same in a game that was moving forward without mercy. That is what admiration became for me over time. Not appreciation, not comfort. Admiration was recognition. Recognition that something in front of me required change, required growth, required surrendering habits I once trusted. I did not always enjoy those moments. In fact, many of them were uncomfortable, but they stayed with me because they mattered. They shaped how I played, they shaped how I thought, and long after the noise faded, they shaped how I remembered the game. These 5 pressures did not define my career for the public, but they defined it for me.